Brian, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into your expertise, right? So I saw you speak at an event and was just blown away by the information. Come to find out, we have many mutual friends in Amberly
Right.
Lago and Brian Bogert, and just amazing human beings that we get the chance to do life with. But you're somebody who reads people's faces, and it sounds
Correct.
crazy, right? It sounds
Yeah.
crazy. Like, what are you talking about? How can my face tell you how I am in my personality? But when I saw your
Right.
presentation, I was like, this is the greatest superpower anybody can
Yes.
learn to
hmm
further their life, their relationships, and everything else in between. So I want you to explain to the audience what that even means, reading
Sure.
faces in order to improve your life, really.
Yeah. I'll give you kind of history of how I've discovered it because I think that plays into your question. Um, like you, the first time I was introduced to it, I was highly, highly skeptical. So 2010, a friend came in from out of town. She said, let's go to dinner. I show up at the restaurant. She calls, says, hey, I'm not going to make it. And I'm like, why? She goes, you got to come over here to the event I'm at. You got to meet one of these speakers. And I'm like, why do I need to meet this speaker? She goes, because he reads faces. And I go, that's bullcrap. I've never heard of it. I have tons of books, body language, you name it. I've never heard of it. This guy's got to be a fraud, a scam. I'm not going. She finally convinced me to go, but I went with an agenda, and that was I was going to prove that this guy was a fraud. And I went over there, I'm going to get him. He's going to make Barnum statements, which are statements that are so generic, they apply to everyone. But we got there and he sat several of us down at a dinner table, and without us saying a word, he just went ding, 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 ding. And I was watching. I thought, okay, if these people have similar facial features, I'm going to see, does he say the same thing or does he say it even when they're different? Because I was in sales, and when you're in sales, you read a lot of different books. So I've read books on mentalism, NLP, body language, statement analysis, you name it. So I'm just waiting to catch this guy. And I didn't. And I'm like, holy crap. Then he got to me. And when he was done, I'm like, this guy's been digging through my trash. It was so mind blowing that our facial features can reveal a bit about us. And so I thought, I'm still skeptical. I bought his book, and he lives in Fort Worth. I live in Dallas, Texas. And for twice a month, I would do a 45-minute drive each way to Fort Worth to do group training. And I started testing it in my professional life. And what I found was it was helping me because I'm a bit of an introvert. But when I'm focused on you, I'm not thinking about me.
Mm.
And that was the first change. But what I realized is this was the first proactive skill that I could use because when I would go and do presentations and things of that nature, I could always check the PowerPoint, my product, the projector itself, but people were always the unknown. But once I had the ability to go look up someone on LinkedIn, what I started doing was changing the presentation for the person instead of showing up to pitch my product.
Wow.
And it made a world of difference.
Yeah, I love, even that little insight of like I'm an introvert, but understanding that it's about you and not me completely changes the game for so many people. I think that would even that tip alone, right? Like
hmm
it will get more people in the room. It'll
hmm
get more people to show up because people are so afraid to interact with others because they're so worried about how they're going to react to them versus being the being the proactive one in the conversation, right? And that's exactly what you're
Yes.
talking about. So talk to us a little bit about, okay, I can look at a photo of somebody on LinkedIn and then I can
Mhm.
literally articulate how to speak to them like within seconds and how to approach that conversation. Talk a little bit about what that means.
Sure. So I'm going to give an analogy and then give a story. Um, when I was a kid, I used to travel like international. I was very lucky to get to travel young. And the problem was when I went somewhere, I thought they should speak English. And if they didn't, well, I'd speak English louder. And that doesn't work. But that's what we do in our everyday lives as well, because we were raised with the golden rule, and that is treat people the way you want to be treated. But you may not want to be treated like me. And so what this allows you to do is go and figure out what do we have in common and what's different. So we'll go very, very high level. And that is people are auditory, visual, or kinesthetic. Well, if they have larger eyes in proportion to the size of their face and they have smaller ears, well, then they're visual people. So I would say things like, oh, I see you coming from, or hey, come take a look, come take a look. If they had larger ears and smaller eyes, then they're auditory people. And so I'd say things like, oh, I hear where you're coming from. Hey, does this sound like a good idea? And so it's no different than the analogy that I just gave of it's not manipulation, it's respect of I'm trying to learn to speak your language to ensure that we're having a communication
Mm.
versus most people want to show up and just be like, listen to me, I've got the best product. These are the reasons you should buy from me. This is the reason you should date me. That's all about me. But when you're trying to talk to the person, that's where you really change it to. You're presenting to the person and not pitching your product.
Yeah, and it's funny, and we'll get into specifics of what you look for and all the things in between. And you were
Mhm.
talking about the size of somebody's ears and eyes and so on and so forth. And I've heard your presentation. I've obviously consumed your content and started to
Yeah,
learn these little things. And I'm looking at my face and I'm going, I don't see anything. Like, what am I?
sure.
Like, you know what I mean? Like my eyes seem average, my ears aren't big. Like I think my eyebrows do point kind of similar to yours.
Right. Angled eyebrows. Yes.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about like if somebody's bland, right? Like, what
Yeah.
if somebody just isn't coming across as anything? Are you still able to look at their face and figure them out?
Absolutely. So you just pick, that's called a non-read. So if there's something that my mentor used to call it nines and tens, like what stands out on their face? And a good analogy for that is if you've ever had a caricature, I can't say it, of your face done, then what they do is they pick one or two things to overemphasize on your face. Well, it's the same thing when you're looking at someone. It's like what stands out. And so let me see. Do we have where if you make it that we can share, I can share my screen, we'll just dissect you live here for the audience
Oh
and tell you
no.
like what stands out. Hey, you
Oh
asked
no.
for
Hold
it.
on. Let me make you a co-host.
Yeah.
So you can share your screen. Now I'm terrified. I'm
Oh
also
no, it's
wearing a
fine.
hat to be fair for those listening and not
Yes.
watching. I'm wearing a hat. So that might
Yeah.
harm you a little bit. My forehead
It
is
will.
really big. That is something that a caricature of me would be drawn about how big my
Right.
forehead is. So
Okay. So just look at the camera. There. Right. Perfect. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Sketch, which is one of my favorite tools here. So with Sketch, it just lets me put arrows and everything. So for people who are listening, I'll try and describe it as we're going. So the first thing that you talked about earlier is even though you have your hat on, you can see that your eyebrows kind of do an angle. So they go straight here and then they angle, whoops, then they angle down. And so what that is when you see angled eyebrows on someone, you have to think, what's their angle? Help me understand it so I can help others. So let me make this a different color so that people can see it since it's kind of dark in there. Oop, click. So when you see somebody with angled eyebrows, it's what's my angle? Help me understand it first, then I can figure out how to help other people. I got an angled eyebrow when I became a corporate trainer and I started doing these presentations later. Why? I had to learn the material so I could speak to the people in the room. Now, there's people who have straight eyebrows or get straight to the point, facts, figures, data, or people can have rounded eyebrows and they think about the people around them. So
mm,
just even looking at somebody with eyebrows will tell you how do you want to talk to the person. So angled eyebrow right here is what's your angle? Let me help you understand it. Then you can figure out how to help other people once you know that information. Okay, let me change back to purple here because that's my brand color. All right, so I get rid of that. Next thing that we look at is what's your eye angle. So if you go from the inside of somebody's eye to the end of their eye, you look at does it angle up? Is it even? Or how does it work? Now, there's two sides of our faces. So if I were to draw this line right down your face here, your left side, where a wedding ring would be, is your personal side. Your right side is business or your exterior side when you're thinking about things. So if you look at your eye angle, let me get rid of some of these other arrows real fast since we moved on from that feature. The next thing over is eye angle. Now I look for this when I'm going into sales. So I look at what type of eyebrow do they have because I know this is how they take in information. Is it straight to the point? Is it what's their angle or do they think about the people around them? The next thing I look for is what we're talking about right now, which is your eye angles. So I'm going to show you because you have two different eye angles. On your personal side, see how your eye is even. So if
hold
you go
on
from
real
the in,
quick. I'm gonna be so self-conscious of this now, the fact that my eyes are angled differently. So I appreciate you
yes,
doing this. This is what I'm gonna be
yeah,
thinking about for the next 3
no
weeks.
worries. Well, this is where we all start. Is we all start in the mirror looking at our own face because you're just sitting there and go, and then later on. But this helps because this helps you understand how you think. And then maybe when you're presenting to somebody who has the opposite, what you need to change. So in your personal side, so again, where a wedding ring would be on your left-hand side, that's your personal side. That's even keel. So tell me the pros and the cons about something. But on your professional side, see how it angles down right
Hmm.
here? So that's, I'm worried about the downside. I don't think that everything's going to work out perfectly. So I start thinking, what can go wrong? That lets me help me build my plans. So if I was coming in, let's say I want you to hire me as a speaker for your event, I would come up and I'd say, hey, when I come up on to speak, people are going to be skeptical about this. It's because they haven't heard of it. I understand it shocks a lot of people. It's pretty common, but that's why I build into my slides. There's even a slide that says, hey, if you're skeptical, don't worry, so was I. But I guarantee when I leave your stage, your audience is going to be wild and they're going to go put this to use. So what did I do? I started with the downside of the concern, and then I changed it to the upside. So when
Mm,
you go in and you look at things, I know that you worry about the downside. What do we need people who worry about the downside? Q&A, product testers, help desk. So it's not oh, you're a negative Nancy or you have rose-colored glasses. We need all kinds of people, but it's what do they think about first? So if I show you a picture of me at 18, and I'll pop it up here in a minute, I'll go find the slide. My eyes used to angle down a lot because my parents raised me to say, things don't always work out. What's your backup plan? And then what's your backup plan for your backup plan? So I always used to worry about the downside of things. But when I got into corporate America and I started getting all these promotions, my eye angle changed over time and actually started to angle up. So
wow.
I want to hear about the positive side of things. But then I went back to a role. So if you look at me from 18 to 38, my eyes angled up quite a bit. But then when I got to 45-ish, my eye angled back down again because I started to hate my job. And I got promoted to a high position, but I was on Zoom calls every day. And all it was is putting out fires. I said I became a professional apologizer. And
Mm.
so I was always worried about what's the worst that's going to happen. Every time the phone rang, it was like, great, something bad. And so my eyes started to angle back down again. So there's 43 muscles in the face. The mind creates movement, movement creates muscle. And so when you're talking to someone, you can't look at a picture from 10 years ago. You need to look at where are they today. So if you imagine our faces are like maps that say, where did you start and where are you today? It doesn't predict the future. It's what it is it's epigenetics is the study of how the outside world impacts us down to a DNA level.
Mm.
So those 43 muscles in the face, when our parents said, don't make that face or it'll get stuck that way, there's some truth to it. Because as we think, we make different faces. And as we do that, those muscles adjust no different than our bicep, our thigh, you name it. So the faces we make repetitively alter the shape of our face.
So people can literally be, be intentional about the way they're thinking about certain things, and they can change the shape of their face.
Correct. So if you take somebody who is unhappy, they did a study that if people go and stand in front of a mirror for 15 minutes a day and smile, it releases endorphins and other things. Well, as you smile more, these muscles up here happen. And so you'll go from a downturned frowny face to an upward face.
Hmm.
But if we're in a bad thing where we sit around and go, just things don't work and we do this face, then what's going to happen is we're going to have a downturn. So whereas you right now have an even mouth right here,
Mhm.
some people will have a downturn mouth where it's like a little frowny face all the time, and it's from frowning. So if you read into books like body language, like I highly recommend this book right here, You Say More Than You Think. This is what does your body language say about you? When you walk into a room, do you have your shoulders back? Are you hunched over like, hey, I'm so happy to be here today? Or, hey, I'm so happy to be here today. It makes a difference. Well, our
Yeah.
face is the same way. So if we smile more, then we'll have the upturn here. But if we do a fake smile, which is where you look at models, actors, actresses, where they have to do the red carpet and everything, our face knows that's not a natural smile. And you'll see that people will develop underneath their nose and above their upper lip a little line right here. That's called a forced smile line. And so
Wow.
what that means, yeah, it's our bodies are an amazing feedback machine. And people on social media, because you said you've been consuming my content, they think that I came up with this, and they are so far off. It's been around since the Greeks. The very first book that we know about is Aristotle talked about it, and it's been refined over time. It used to be part of the. Oh, let me stop sharing your face here so we can have a conversation. Sorry, I was
No,
looking
you're
at you
good.
down here, not up there. Um, so it goes back to the Greeks. It was part of the academic system until Henry VIII said, "I don't like the idea that beggars and vagabonds can use this against their fellow man," and he had it yanked out. But it
Wow.
didn't. Yeah, but it stayed around. So it wasn't in everyday classes anymore. However, how do you create characters for a book or in film or television or whatever? So authors and artists still took the courses. So you can Google physiognomy and like Edgar Allan Poe or physiognomy Dickinson, and it'll talk about how they were influenced to create the characters in their book by learning about different facial features. Now, why is that important? We all had required reading in school. So we've been taught our entire life through books what people's facial features mean to a degree. So if
Mm,
I say, hey, keep a stiff upper lip, we all know that means be stoic. Well, you really break down that phrase. If you see someone that has a thinner upper lip or they do lip suppression, they go, it will thin out their lips over time. So if we see someone who has thinner upper lips and you ask them a lot of personal questions, it's like this: you're too much in their face when you're
mm.
talking to them. So they put up a wall. And or if we say, hey, I just don't really have a nose for this, or hey, I'm all ears. Well, then that's saying I'm auditory. Let me listen. We talk about faces nonstop. Nobody just takes the time to really break down what it is until they learn this skill.
Wow. And it's so fascinating too. And like when we think about what learning this skill could allow you to do in your
Hmm.
career, in the businesses you're building, in the relationships, the fact that it was yanked from schools is a massive disservice to the younger people who are trying to come up and learn and connect and all the things that we all have issues with now.
Yes. Well, if you look at what was school originally created for, and I'm not knocking school teachers. I have a 7-year-old. Teachers are literally raising the future of the world. But what is taught in school is how to become an employee,
Right.
not how to connect with others. You learn math, calculus, algebra. You're lucky if you signed up to take body language or psychology as an elective. But most people are pushed to learn this skill to go work at a company or a factory, is what it was originally created for. But we're not taught how to bond. We should be taught statement analysis. We should be taught phrasing and grammar, not how do you spell a word, but are you speaking correctly? When you send text messages and emails, what is it relaying to others? But communication skills, like I'll tell you a funny journey for me. Somebody told me, hey, you'd be good in PR. I'm like, okay. So I went to school for that. But the college I went to lost their accreditation, which meant I would have had a degree, but they wouldn't have been accredited from that university. And so I went to my counselor and I'm like, what can I take? And they're like, well, you can take communication studies. And my gut reaction is like, isn't that what dumb people take? Because it's not seen as a business skill. But it was some of the best classes that I had because it was public speaking, body language, you name it. That should be taught to business people because you can be the smartest business person, but you need other people to make businesses run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating too, especially now with the younger generations, right? You're talking about your daughter who's 7. I have a stepson who's 14 and a stepdaughter who's 11.
Yeah.
And they're in their phones all the time, right?
Hmm.
Like there's literally my stepson will be on his VR with a kid who lives 3 doors down, right? And
Right.
I'm like, go hang out in person.
Yeah.
Learning these skills will give them that grace when they finally have to get in front of other people, right?
100%. That's what we're taught. It's fun to make fun of millennials, but we really have to break down why they are the way they are. So they grew up with a device similar to this, right? A phone. So they've grown up with the ability to take and retake photos. I grew up with where we had to take a picture, we had to send it off, right? Before digital photos. You got it back like 2 weeks later. You just lived with bad pictures.
Yeah.
But even my 7-year-old, she'll like, take a picture for me. And then she'll go, I don't like it, delete it. Let's take another one. So they've grown up with instant ability to edit things that we didn't have. When I grew up, the phone rang, you just picked it up, no caller ID. You just took a wild guess. I'm going to say hello,
Yeah.
not knowing is it a loved one, is it a telemarketer, you name it. But that's not the world they've grown up in. They've grown up with caller ID. Do I want to talk to that person? Yes or no? Text messaging and email allows me to craft the perfect message before I send it. And now you can even edit your text after you send it, versus when I grew up, computers were starting but some of my first classes, I had a typewriter. And for people who don't know what that is, you've got the keyboard, you've got paper, and when you screw up, you had to scroll it out, get something called whiteout, and put it on the page, put your paper back in, and then move forward. That's not the way that kids live. They
Yeah.
live where they can perfect everything. And so the problem is when they go to talk to someone, they can't perfect it. They have to do something on the fly, and it freaks them out. They're just away from it. So you and I were talking before. There's a study by intelligent.com that was done in December of last year. They talked to 800 employers and they said, what's the hardest thing about hiring someone right now, fresh out of school? And it came back with the 3 that I always mention on here. 53% couldn't hold eye contact while they're there. So that's why if you ever see my keynotes, I talk about eyebrows. So I get known as the eyebrow guy. But the reason I'm teaching eyebrows are you can see it from across the room, but eyebrows lead to eye contact. You get
Mm,
credit for looking at someone's eyebrows and creating that connection. Because as we're digitally connected, we're more disconnected than ever from each other. So when you're in a room, if you're literally focusing on the other person and not your smartwatch and not your phone, but you're focused on them and thinking, how do I speak their language? People can feel when you're talking to them or you're talking at them. And it creates that difference. So, like with my daughter, I want her to make eye contact with people. That's how we build trust. There's four basic human needs: physical safety, emotional safety. People want to feel seen and heard, and people want to feel connected. Can't help with the first two, but we can help people feel seen and heard and connected by really wanting to create a connection with them. And when you're analyzing their face and you're thinking, do we speak the same language or how do I speak their language? People know you're focused on them.
mm. That's fascinating. Is there such thing as too much eye contact? I get weirded out when somebody's too much eye contact. Stop
Yes.
staring at me like that.
Yeah. Well, and it's a really good book about that is called Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. And it's where in the world or what where someone was raised determines what they're comfortable with. So is there too much proximity? Well, in some countries, like if you've ever seen like people get on a train in Japan, like they literally have people who push you in so that, because it's
Yeah,
so packed.
yeah.
People here would lose their minds in the US if we were pushed in like that. So there's proxemics, which is how close or far do you stand from someone. Then there's what's the appropriate amount of eye contact. Well, in some cultures, like I had somebody reach out to me for coaching the other day, and they said, I want to learn how to do eye contact because in my culture, the way I was raised, you don't make eye contact as a sign of respect.
Mm,
Versus here, we literally say, hey, look me in the eye when you talk to me. Because for us, we were raised in the West, in the America, that eye contact is how you judge someone. But in a lot of cultures, a sign of respect is to listen, but not make eye contact. So if you look at like historically royalty and things, you were supposed to avert your eyes unless they made eye contact with you. Then you were allowed to look at them. And so we see
mm,
that in a lot of movies and things of that nature.
yeah.
Um, what I really love, and this is what helped me the most, is this was the first proactive skill that I had ever discovered. Now, being in sales, most of us do research. Hey, do they have any charities? Do they have kids? Let me look them up on Facebook. But that was to get an idea of what they do with their spare time. But what I started doing is if I knew who I was going to meet with, I went and looked them up on LinkedIn. And just like we did for your face, I would draw arrows and go, okay, this is what this means. This is what that means, and change the presentation. So there's a people go, well, that won't work in my industry. So I've taught this to realtors, automotive, engineers. Why? Because engineers are brilliant, but they have to communicate with other people to get their stuff done.
Yeah.
I teach it to attorneys. I'm speaking at two attorney conferences, one in November, one in January. What's funny is that's how my mentor discovered it. He was an attorney who learned it for jury consulting. He ended up loving it so much. He's like, but there's not a lot of modern books. So you can find a lot of books on Chinese face reading, which correlates to some of it, but that's a lot more about your internal gut health and organ health. So it'll say like, okay, if you've got this area of skin, you've got rosé, what does that mean? Or, what does this bump mean? Now, so you can read up on Chinese medicine. It's very, very interesting. Like they'll talk about how parts of the ear here are where your segments in life.
Mm,
But what I found was this just helped me figure out how do I look at people and start figuring out I want to speak this person's language. So I go look them up on LinkedIn. I say what stands out on their face, and I'll go back and go, let me alter my presentation. So a good example of that is eyebrow height tells you how long before somebody feels comfortable making a decision. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It's just when do I feel comfortable to pull the trigger? So if somebody has a high eyebrow, you imagine it like data racing down their forehead to get into their eye. The higher the eyebrow, I can only go so fast. Let me go over the speed bump and then I can try and speed back up.
mm.
But if their eyebrow is down here, then they make decisions very fast. And so we'll teach this. I teach it at Door to Door Con in January, and that is these are people who still knock on doors for a living, and they
By
have
the way, I
seconds
did
to
I
close a
did a
deal.
job like that for
Yeah.
3 weeks of my life and quit immediately. It was the
Oh yes.
worst. It was
Hmm.
the worst thing I ever did. This was obviously many, many years ago, but I was like, never again will I do that. So God bless these individuals who do this.
They literally. So I I was talking to a guy who bought some flashcards yesterday, and him and I have been talking back and forth because he's got a whole team. They go and relocate for like 30 to 90 days to a new city. They get dropped off in the morning, they get picked up at night. And literally, you talk about hearing a lot of no's. You get cussed at, you get doors slammed in your face, you get guns pulled on you, and you get the cops called on you.
Yeah.
So it is not for the meek at all. And so you go one level up from that, and that's selling cars. And what I mean by one level up is nobody really people love to get a new car, but nobody loves the sales process. So you've got, as soon as somebody walks up, you don't know who's going to be there, but you can immediately start looking at their facial features and figuring out, okay, how do I help them find the right car? So we talked earlier about the three different types of eyebrows. If they have straight eyebrows, are you interested in the horsepower, the gas mileage, the interest rate, the payment? If they have angled eyebrows, tell me what the most important feature for you is in a car, and then we can help you figure it out. If they have rounded eyebrows, wait till your friends see you in this new car. You make it about other people. I'm still selling a car, but I'm presenting to the person instead of commission breath of buy a car, buy a car. You need a car? What's the most expensive?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just such a quick read, but I know that you go, obviously what you teach on stage and you talk about, it goes so much further than the eyebrows, but for people,
Correct.
they learn those eyebrows. I want to go back really quick to that study you were talking about where what was it? 52% can't make eye contact, 57% can't make eye contact. I know there were
Yeah,
other numbers that you talked about.
sure.
And I want to drive this home because people don't realize how important this is, especially for the next generation. That's why,
Yes.
because when I think about these communication skills, I'm noticing 14 and 11-year-olds in my house who don't necessarily have these skills yet. And so
Right.
they need to start learning them. Talk a little bit about those other stats that we talked about.
Sure. So it was some crazy numbers. 53% couldn't make eye contact when they were in the room. 23% refused to turn on their camera for a virtual interview. So that'd be like you and I just having this conversation today. How would this work? If I'm trying to get hired, you need to know who I am. I need to see you. So this is a total ADD moment. A very simple fix for anybody that does Zoom calls is you get a post-it note and you point an arrow right where your camera is, right? So you want right above it, put an arrow, because if not, we end up doing the Brady Bunch thing where I'm looking down here to see what's going on instead
Yeah.
of talking to you. Now, I have a secret set up here, and it's not really a secret, but my camera sits on my laptop, but you're actually behind me. So I'm looking past my camera to see you, which is what people need to do for Zoom calls. Because if I did a Zoom call like this the entire time, it's not as effective as if I look at you. Well, we're
Yeah.
doing that with our eyes because people are like, yeah, yeah, no, it's doing great. But we don't feel like people are actually talking to us. So little simple things like that matter. I talk about there's everybody knows AI in terms of artificial intelligence. With AI that way and automation coming, people's jobs are going to be replaced. There's not going to be a need for our companies and things. So there's two versions of AI that I think everybody needs to focus on. You have to already be interesting, meaning you have to have branding. When people Google you, what's going to make them want to take that next step to learn more about you? And then the other AI is you have to actually be interested in others.
Mm,
So when you meet with someone, are you actually interested in them or are you trying to push your product? If you're not interested in the person in determining if it's the right product for them, you're doing the wrong thing. And people can smell commission breath and neediness. And when you show up and throw up versus actually having a conversation to understand, are they the right people? That is going to become so, so important. I mean, you and I know they were talking about AI at the conference we were at. Well, salespeople, customer service people are all being replaced because a bot can work 24/7.
yeah.
When you can get in a room or you can make eye contact. So I was raised in the day and age of Dr. Seuss. The reality is you got to win the Zoom to get in the room. And that is Zoom is good, but like right now, I can see your arms across, but I can't see your legs crossed. What are you doing? So
Yeah.
body language is still important. Matter of fact, I already talked about Janine's book. I think you have to learn body language, but we can't see body language on a lot of Zoom calls. But if you learn to decode facial features, you still have an advantage of figuring out how do I create that connection with others.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I don't like Brian, you have my number. We've texted before. If you ever tried to call me and I didn't know you
Mhm.
were trying to call me, I wouldn't answer the phone. But I
Right.
will hop on a Zoom call at any given moment because I can see people and how they're reacting and what they want, right? Like, and I don't know if
Yes.
I was subconsciously decoding facial features, not in the way you were, but I pay
Right.
attention to how they're reacting, right?
Hmm.
And I think this is because I've had this podcast now for 8.5 years.
Yeah.
And I would make people 8.5 years ago turn their cameras on. And back then, that wasn't a real thing. Like people were like, "What do you mean I have to be on camera?" Like
Right.
so many people tried to not be on it. And now that obviously we live in a Zoom world, right? Like where people
Yes.
are doing this. So that number of 23% won't turn their camera on for an interview. That absolutely blows my mind. And then the third stat you gave me was like 19% took their parents to the interview. Could you
Yes.
imagine?
Well, let me take it a step further. I asked an HR person. They said that a lot of times it's the parents scheduling the call for their kids. I mean, I get the whole idea that we a goal as a parent. You mentioned that you have kids too. The goal is to be a better parent than your parent. And what I mean by that is just what can I do that's one step above and beyond. But scheduling an interview for them, how are they going to? Are you going to drive them to work every day too? I mean, there's a point that autonomy is important because sadly, we're all mortal. We're not going to be around forever. You know, the taking the bird aspect, because we went and saw Wild Robot this weekend. You have to get the bird to fly on its own to migrate. You can't carry your kids everywhere you go. So, are we trying to be better parents? Yes. But are we becoming that helicopter parent? Is not the way to let your kids fly.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to set them free every once in a while, let them
Mhm.
figure it out on their own, let them fail, let them do all those things, right?
Yeah.
And I think that obviously, have you ever worked with the youth with these skills? Is that something you've done?
We have with like little teen groups and stuff. Sadly, the parents don't realize how important it is because we tend to think from our own lens. You know, so you're like, oh, it's just part of growing up. They'll be fine when they go to the workforce. They haven't really sat down to figure out that tablets and technology are amazing. My daughter has a tablet, but we've got to get them off the tablet and playing. So, like, one of the things that I do is I go and pick up my daughter on my days from school, and I want her to play in the park with the kids because I know as soon as we get home, she's going to grab her tablet and sit down. And we were talking before, you mentioned like doing VR with the kids down the road. I don't judge the fact that kids play on games together because if she wants to play a game that she can play with a friend or a cousin or somebody that's 12 houses down or 2 states away, it's no different than playing a board game in Monopoly, right? They're playing, they're talking, they're conversing. Like I love some of the games that she goes into. I hop on my iPad and we play together. And she shows me like, here's this world and here's what I built. It's her getting to be creative and share things with me. But then we
Yeah.
go out and the rule at dinner is like you can't have technology unless we're somewhere and I'm at a dinner and there's other adults there and she finishes her food and then we're still eating and conversing. Then she can have her tablet. But so many people walk in, slap the tablet down, slap the headphones on the kid, and they have conversations, but they're leaving kids out. And look, we all need a break. Trust me, there's days when I'm like, here's your tablet as soon as you see her. But don't make that the primary thing because you're robbing them of social skills. And again, going forward, everything that we need is through other people. Yes, they grow up in the day and age. I can text it, I can email it, I can order a date online, I can order dinner online. But really, what's going to help people succeed is face to face communication.
Yeah. It's crazy to think that something that was just so obvious to us. It's something that we have to be really intentional about now. And there have been times back when I first started my business and I was busy in the business rather than
Right.
making connections and all those things. I would go like 3 or 4 days sometimes without talking to anybody. I lived alone at the time, worked from my house, and then I'd finally go out and I couldn't speak properly. So it's like that
Yes.
idea of like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And it's so
Hmm.
true. And if they're not using it, like you said, yes, even if it's in the video game world or whatever, as long as they're communicating, they can get better.
Yeah.
And again, I don't necessarily think like, oh, once they get into the workforce, they'll be fine. Like I don't. I'm a little worried, and maybe I'm your typical 40-year-old who's looking at the next generation, going, "Oh, I don't know about these guys."
Yeah.
But I think these skills that you're talking about, reading facial features, learning how to communicate with different individuals, like I think it's something that somebody really truly needs to focus on. So I love the work that you're doing and continuing to do,
Hmm.
all over the world, which is just fascinating. So I want to ask you a question
Yeah.
that I ask every single person on this show. It's a two-part question. The
Hmm.
first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Sure. Success is just being a little bit better every single day. So, what's one thing you've done that can enhance your life one way or the other? So, for me, like I get up in the morning and while I'm making my coffee, I throw something on YouTube. So, I'm learning something from someone else every day because we get stuck in our own bubble. And, the algorithms and everything, they go, oh, well, you like this content. Justin likes this content. Let's only serve him this content. So sometimes what you have to do is go click on something that you have no desire in, but you're learning something new. So that's one of the first things I do. I'm guilty about not doing this enough, but something that if your readers are looking for something, or sorry, if your listeners are looking for something, pick up Mel Robbins' The High Five Habit. And what that is why every morning, as soon as you get up, don't touch your phone, don't brush your teeth, go to a mirror and give yourself a high five, because that starts creating positive associations every time you see yourself in a mirror. So I got
Mm,
kind of away from that. Now that you called it out, I need to add that back to my rotation. And so that's one of the three things. Then number two, again, I listen to YouTube because I want to learn something new. And then the third thing that I do is if somebody pops to mind, I send them a text or I give them a call, because I do believe we're connected in a weird kind of way that if somebody comes across your mind, there's a reason either you want to talk to them or they need to talk to you. And I can't tell you how many times that that's happened. Somebody's like, I have had the worst day. Thank you for calling.
yeah. That's
So,
perfect. I love that. By
yeah,
the way, one of my non-negotiables, I have 4 non-negotiables every day. One is to reach out to somebody I'm connected with and just check in on them.
love it.
And it's not necessarily, oh, they popped in my head. I'm sure that happens. Like if they're the person who popped in my head, that's the person I'm reaching out to that day. But what
Yeah.
it's done for me, and
Mm.
it's fascinating. I rarely go a day without somebody checking in on me. And that's because I have this
Good.
routine to just check in, right? And Boger is somebody who is
Hmm.
usually there at least once a week. Yo,
Yeah,
thinking about you, man. This. He's just such a good guy. But
he is.
it's such a great thing. And I don't think people do it enough. And that's something when I share that on a stage or whatever, people are like, I'm instituting that in my life. And I hope they do, because it like you said, when you're building that connection with people and it
Hmm.
is that blip in your head, like if you reach out to them, it's a stronger bond every single time, right?
It
And not
is.
enough people do it. So I'm glad that you do it. So I want to ask you another question.
Sure.
I want you to think you're, at the late stages of your life, you're about to cross over the plane, whatever that looks like to you in your mind.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine that everything that you've created, all this content disappears. You're no
Right.
longer the eyebrow guy, right?
Hmm.
All this content disappears, and you can only be remembered for one sentence. What would you want that sentence to be?
Loving person. I think that's it. Doesn't look, I have a daughter, so legacy is obviously that. I want my daughter to remember me in a good way, but it's so much more than that. A loving person is helping as many people as you can, and not for anything other than helping people, not what you're going to get back, but
Mm,
what can you do to make somebody else's day a better day is what I want to be remembered for. Like Brian helped me with this, or Brian was a loving person because of that. That's real legacy, is the impact you make on others.
I love it, man. That's such a great answer. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how do
Yeah.
people find you? How do they work with you? What's all the good stuff?
So everything everywhere I'm known as subtle skills, but I learned that nobody can spell subtle. So the easiest way to find it is getthecheatsheet.com. Will take you to my resources page. That is, how do you get my information? How do you follow me on social media? How do you get a copy of the cheat sheet, obviously? And then all the books that I read that have made a difference in my life, I just put a link to them there because they helped me and I want them to help other people also.
I love it, man. So, guys, go check that out. But, Brian, like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is
Sure.
called The Growth Now Movement, that
Mhm.
question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Unplanned moments. I'll tell you my bigger one, and this one was what led us to being here today, is I got fired in November of 2022 at a company I'd been at for 21 and a half years. And it was fine. I was unhappy. I'm not happy about the way it was done, but I had one foot in, one foot out where I hated my job. And so I started speaking for free on the side. And at the moment I got fired, my gut reaction was like, oh my God, I got to find another job. But what I realized is, why do I want to look for another place where I've been unhappy? And I put 21 and a half years into helping somebody else make money. And so I lived off my 401k for a year and thought, am I going to give this a shot or not? And there was daily, do I go back and look for another job daily? Because I made really good money and I built a lifestyle around that. And it was hard to deplete savings hoping something would work. But I realized I was miserable for 8 hours a day.
Mm,
And now things are tough. And anybody who's an entrepreneur, it's never just like, oh, I took off and my business is great. There's daily challenges, but it's not a daily hatred of where it's at. And people need to research cortisol levels, like the level of stress that comes along with what you do for a day matters. And so it was very tough to overcome that employee mindset of, let me go work for another company in a safe job. But let me tell you, there's not such a thing as a safe job anymore because we don't work for companies for 20 years that take care of us for the rest of our life. We're now on 401ks where it's like, hey, while you're with us, we'll help you. But when you're gone, we're not going to help you anymore. So
Yeah.
that was the biggest growth change for me. And there's still days of imposter syndrome and wanting to give up that I still struggle with now and then.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, and it's so true, right? Like, choose your stress level. Like,
Yes.
where is your stress? And I'll tell you this, man, like, even when times were tough in my business and building everything out, um, I would choose that stress over working for somebody else and being miserable all day. And like you said, pointing out cortisol levels and wanting to live a long time, like, you have to manage that as best you can. So,
Yes.
take that leap, dude. And by the way, I didn't realize you were only doing this full time for that short amount of time.
Yeah.
You're everywhere. You're literally everywhere in such a short amount of time. Like, and it
Yeah.
might be because you're in my circle, obviously with
Right.
Amberly and Steve Sims and Bogert and all these people. But kudos to you in such a short time building this
Appreciate that.
brand for yourself. Like, that's absolutely amazing, man. So
Yeah.
really
We're
cool
coming up
stuff.
on year two.
I love it, man. Brian, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this wisdom with my audience. I want people to
Absolutely.
dive deeper with you, learn more from you, look them up on
Yeah.
Instagram, start getting the free content, then sign up and get more because this is absolutely a game changer for people. Dude, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad we met.